Thank you for joining us today for today's Call Center Helper webinar, 5 clever ways to improve your service levels. Really excited today to be kicking things off. I'll start by introducing our panel once again. I'm delighted to be joined by Gary Gormley from Fab Solutions. Gary, hello.
Hello, Xander. I am Gary Gormley of Fab Solutions. So we're a contact center consultancy that helps contact centers look at customer experience training and the whole contact center platform. So if anybody wants to say hello, feel free to reach out and say hello.
Amazing. I think, again, as someone who's seen your presentation, I'm really looking forward to what you're bringing to
Don't big it up too much. Make me nervous.
It's all right. You're going first. You'll be okay. And I'm also joined by Dave Johnson from Five9. Hello, Dave.
Hi there. So Dave Johnson, Five9. I've been with Five9 2 years now. I'm a strategic program director, which means I have responsibility for some of Five9's largest and most complex projects, multi-year, often global. And beyond that, I've got a 20-year experience in the contact center industry, really being involved in some of the UK and the US's very large programs of work. So we're looking forward to today very much.
Excellent. And I think I can speak for everyone else involved in this. Yeah, we're really looking forward to today as well. And just to round out the panel, my name is Xander Freeman. I'm Digital Content Director at Call Center Helper, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. So as always with Call Center Helpers webinars, a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning. We like to encourage active participation from our audience, so please do get involved. You can do so by clicking on chat at the bottom, changing the to everybody, and please do mention what you're doing in relation to service levels in the chat. You'll see there are various points in the webinar today where we'll be asking for discussion from our audience, so please do get involved. Again, we love to hear from you, and honestly, some of the best tips and questions we get do come from you guys. So it's yeah, please do participate. We love hearing from you. And again, as always, replay and slides will be available later this afternoon on callcenterhelper.com/article/recorded webinars. Usually about an hour and a half after we finish today, you should be able to find both the slide decks from Gary and Dave, but also the on-demand webinar recording as well. So stay tuned for that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we do like to encourage participation where possible. As always, with a Call Center Helper webinar, we will be giving away a gift card for the best tip that comes in from the audience. In order to participate in that, please do start with either hashtag question or hashtag tip, depending on what you're contributing. But again, we love to hear from you. Please do so. So to kick things off today, we're going to be starting with a quick poll. Let me just get that loaded. There we go. That should be launched now. Are you happy with how you are currently meeting your service levels? We're thrilled, pretty happy, could be better, or not happy. Ultimately, I like to think this will skew a certain direction because they're on a webinar about improving your service levels. But Dave, let's start with you. What do you expect to see from this?
Well, it's interesting you say that. One of the things that we're starting to see now, and again, a part of the presentation, is AI is forcing people to really think again about their SLAs. Different SLAs, what people are talking about is smart SLAs. So I'm hoping people are going to take a lot away from this in terms of just rethinking their strategy around this whole space.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting as well. Just again, I'm trying very hard not to mention anything that I know is coming up in your presentations, but I think there's going to be some really interesting tips coming out today. Gary, I can see your face as well. So I know, like I say, I know what's coming with both your presentations. So I'll tell you what, let me end that poll here and share the results with everyone. So we're looking at about the majority of the audience skewing towards could be better or pretty happy, which I think, fair to say. Yeah. I think that's nothing unsurprising there. But again, very, very interesting to hear from our audience. So without further ado, we'll kick off with the rest of the agenda. Gary, we'll be starting with you and your presentation. So very much looking forward to that. But before we do that, one quick poll again from our side. Let me just quickly launch that. There we go. What SLA is the most important metric for your contact center? AHT, abandoned call rate, average speed of answer, or other? And if it is other, please do pop it in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Gary, what do you expect to see from this?
You know what? I can see it in front of me, so it's very hard not to cheat. But I know what I'm hoping I'm not likely to see, because I think we've gone past the point of one particular metric that's on there. But it'll be interesting. I'm curious to say, where will it sit? Will people lean towards call abandonment, or will they lean towards maybe the call interaction? And it'd be interesting to see how many go in the other spot. Actually, that'd be an interesting one.
Yeah, I think so. I think, to be fair, if you look at how it's shaping out, yeah, that's more or less what you're saying. It will be interesting to see what comes in under other. But I'll tell you what, let me wrap up that poll there, and without further ado, we'll have a look at the results. Again, average speed of answer leading the way mostly there. Abandoned call rate in the mix, same with HD. Again, I think you're right though. This is one of those things where it can be quite subjective depending on your contact center, which one is
quite polarizing sometimes when you talk about AHD, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's one of the nice things about this industry, right? It's not a one size fits all situation. So I'll tell you what, without further ado, let's head over to your presentation and kick things off.
Okay, right. Let me make sure that I don't overrun, Xander. So keep me honest and keep me to time. And I'll share my screen. Here we go. So we should be able to see the topic, which is clever ways to improve your contact center service level. So anybody who knows me will know that I love a good quote. And there's probably two that I've done over time that people are probably getting bored of now, but I think they are particularly relevant for what we're about to talk about today. So there's a joint quote that I've done here from a chap called Peter Drucker. So he's a big influence for me in terms of some of the work that he's done, and he talks about productivity and he talks about efficiency, and I think these two things stand out on the page for me when we talk about clever ways to improve contact center SLAs. And he talks about what gets measured gets managed, and I fused it together with and measure what matters. Those are two key quotes that he talks about when you're looking at improvements in performance, improvements in efficiency. And I think they're particularly relevant for what we're about to talk about today in terms of clever ways to improve contact service levels. And I think for me, I've included those because they are pretty much the crux of what we talk about. It's a lot of the stuff that you've just shared in your polls are around metrics, around performance measures. So it's important that we're having a mind on what we're measuring, why it's important that we measure it, and then why that matters so much. Because when we start to think about the backdrop and the landscape that we're in terms of customer service, customer satisfaction, customer experience, there's a few things that are probably useful to draw out as part of the conversation. And the most recent customer satisfaction results from the UK CSI shown a big swing in customer satisfaction, and the overall customer satisfaction levels over the last 9 or so years have actually dropped by quite a significant margin. And you can see the roller coaster that we're on here. So we've got some nice little those are meant to be people in a roller coaster, if nobody could tell. But you can see actually that cliff there over the last 2 years has really started to drop quite significantly. And customers are telling us that we're not quite getting it right. We're not quite getting the customer experience right. We're not really managing complaint satisfaction levels in a way that they're happy with. And actually, at some points, they've actually questioned our values and our ethos as a contact center and actually saying, are we actually customer centric? And I think everybody in this in this industry likes to say that they are customer centric, but some of the actions and some of the realities, when you look at this graph, suggest not. And I think maybe it's a pandemic issue, but there seems to be a feeling that we are losing that emotional connection with our customers. And that might be manifesting itself in a way that is born from poor service levels, or your call is important to us, but actually you're taking a long time to answer it. So actually, really, is it that important? And I think this is further amplified by some of the stats outside of the UK CSI. And it says that 39% of consumers have less patience with us as contact centers than pre-pandemic. They're actually now starting to snap back and say, we're more demanding as a consumer, is what they're saying. Or actually, are their expectations just naturally rising? 67% of customers are saying that they cite bad customer experience as a reason for switching their provider. And the final one there, 60% of customers are saying that they still feel like we work in silo. And I think when we start to look at clever ways to improve contact center service levels, we don't just have the agents that are there to answer the phone. We interact with lots of different organizations or lots of different departments within the contact center that can have an impact. And we're going to talk about that in the session that we've got today. So what is it all about? It's all about worms. What do I mean, worms? Am I talking nonsense? Well, for those that are savvy and for those that are a little bit more creative, you might identify an acronym that's made out of all of these different words. And there is a worm in there somewhere. So if you spot it, maybe drop it into the chat and see which word you can make, or what words can you make from all of the start points of each of these. Maybe that's worth a prize or a voucher, Xander, the most creative word that we can make. But essentially what we talk about, it actually, I'm not going to ruin it, but it'll come to it. But we start off with waiting. And when we think about the contact center, the most important person is probably not the outside of the person that we're dealing with, is the person that's waiting to interact with us. And that's a really interesting dynamic in terms of how we start to reduce those wait times. So how are we starting to think about that from an agent's perspective, and what are some of the metrics that we do? We'll talk about that in a second. And then we've got another one that starts for overproduction. And that links to how we are using our people and how evolved and maybe over-engineered some of our processes are. Then you've got the amount of rework that we get in the contact center, and these are all things that impact our ability to deliver service levels. We've got the motion. So motion for us would be, how far are we sending things? Are we having to walk all over the office to get things done, or having things coming back and forth? And then you've got that processing piece. So are we over processing? Are we making the process just a little bit too complicated? And then you've got what we call inventory. And inventory for us is suppose that backlog and that amount of work that we've got to do. And then the final piece there is transport. So that might be things like, are we seeing customers being escalated into management? And are we seeing those go into customer backlogs and processes and things like that? And actually that spells out what we call worm pits. And the four that I've just picked out that are really important for us here are wait. So how are we tracking against that average speed of answer? How are we tracking against the longest call waiting? How are we tracking speed of abandonment and maybe the average response times that we might be seeing from different channels? Then we've got that overproduction piece. So how is our service level being impacted by agent available time, utilization, occupancy? And again, all of these things are really important considerations when we're trying to optimize and improve our service level. The final couple that we've got here are rework. So what are we looking at in terms of the number of times that we're having to redo the same piece of work because it's not been done right in the first instance? So we look at rework there as first contact resolution and how can we improve that as a metric. We look at the number of complaints that we're having to handle and the amount of touch points that's needed as part of that. And then obviously there's that repeat caller demand. So if we didn't satisfy it in the first instance, have we got people ringing up again and again and again because we've not got the process right? And then the ultimate part of that is then, are we making the process just that little bit too complicated? And how is that impacting call handling time? How is it impacting the average handling time and the aspect of that conversation? And how does it impact the end-to-end process? Because that's the stuff that impacts overall service levels and our ability to deliver awesome service levels. So we can influence and improve service levels in probably three key ways. And for anybody who's in a planning role, they'll love this next slide because it's all about supply and demand. Have you got the right supply versus have you got the right amount of resource to manage the demand that's coming into the contact center? Then there's the aspect of the conversation itself. How are we structuring that conversation and how much information are we asking the customers to absorb, and how much of that cognitive overload is happening in the customer's brain when we're giving them the ins and outs of the kitchen sink when we're having a conversation. And then the final aspect there is then thinking about technology. How are we leveraging and how are we using technology as an enabler to improve service levels? So there's three key aspects that I want to cover as part of this next set of slides. And we're going to deep dive into the first one, which is about smart shrinkage management. So it's all about that supply and it's all about that demand. Two key pieces in the contact center that if we can get right, we can improve service levels on a very fundamental level. So have we got the right supply of people? So when we think about this, we have to think about, are we reviewing the shrinkage that's in the contact center? And do we know where we're losing people? And are we adjusting shrinkage on a month-to-month basis and being a little bit more dynamic in our approach so that we've got the right amount of resource and we can forecast in the right way? And managing that in a very real way, so having a more dynamic shrinkage plan can have a really positive impact in terms of flexibility of the operation and avoiding some of the burnout that we see from people because they're being overscheduled or they're being overutilized. Then we have to think about how we're starting to, and this leads a little bit into the technology piece, but how are we starting to think about the smart IVR and the ways that we can route conversations to customers. And that enables us to have much more of an efficient process. So we're not getting people through to the wrong area and then having to do a load of handoffs, and people aren't experiencing that syndrome of where, oh, I've been transferred 3 or 4 times. So having more smart routing and using your IVR in a more dynamic way can certainly help improve that overall direction of traffic going into the contact center. And then the last thing there, and I've talked about planning already, but I'm a big planning buff. Planning always used to be my best friend in the contact center. And that's because you can start to have more dynamic models and you can start to have more of a relationship, which is going to help you make more data-led decisions in your contact center. By having more relationships with your real-time team, having more focus with your planning team helps build out those models that are going to help you have a more clever and a more savvy approach to managing the service level. The next bit is what I call conversational re-engineering. So how are we actually approaching the conversation? And I like to use a phrase called an AHT autopsy. Sounds very clinical, but essentially what it means is how are we managing the 3 aspects that make up AHT? So it can be a very polarizing conversation, AHT, but the way that I approach it is to say, right, there's 3 aspects to it. There's talk, there's hold, and there's wrap. How are we approaching each of those different sections to see if we can make some more efficiencies in how customers are holding? So we talked earlier about the silos, and we talked about how you can start to transfer calls around the contact center, and you can be on hold internally for quite some time, and that has a direct impact on our ability to handle AHT. And quite often what we do when we're talking about AHT is we'll beat the agent with a stick to say, you need to say less, or you need to condense and rush and move some of the elements and the aspects of the conversation. When in reality, we could probably make some efficiency with our hold times, and we can probably make some efficiencies when we start to look at the wrap times and look at how much time based on disposition outcomes we're spending in wrap. And are there some behaviors that we maybe need to curb as a result of that? Then we actually go into the conversation itself. And what we're not suggesting here is that we go in and we say, right, remove all that from your script or remove that from your conversation because it's wasteful. What we want to look at is the cognitive overload of a customer. How much information can a customer take at any given time? And are we needing to break that down in a way that helps reduce the amount of customer confusion that means they ask us to repeat information, or they ask us to follow all that up with an email, which adds extra time onto your AHT? So what's the conversation that's happening in your contact center? And how can we start to think about how we redesign some of that to make it simpler and easier for customers to absorb that information? The other aspect is coaching the conversation, not the AHT. And I've already alluded to that a little bit, is to say, right, we can be guilty of whacking the agents with a stick and saying, you need to bring your AHT down, you need to bring your AHT. AHT is a planning metric. What's not a planning metric is the actual call and the conversation and the call handling and the ability and the flow that happens between the customer and the agent, and how they have access to the right information that's going to help reduce the amount of time that we've got on that call. So focus and coach the conversation and how that conversation is being played rather than thinking about the AHT aspect. And then you're either going to love them or you're going to hate them. I am in between, but have a think about your guidance and your scripting and saying, have we got the right information to present to an agent when the conversation is a very structured conversation? And actually, have we got the right prompts and support when that conversation becomes a little bit more complex? A lot of the contact centers I deal with like guidance. A lot of agents that I speak with actually like scripts because it takes away their ability to have to think on their feet. And when they're dealing with such complicated calls, and when they're dealing with such a high volume, there is a requirement for them to know a lot of information. And that can be quite challenging as an agent. So we need to think about what the guidance is and what the scripting is that we can provide them to be able to do their job in the best possible way. And that leads on nicely to some of the stuff we talk about with technology. So when we think about technology, we think about the contact center system that we're using. And that's an important part because it kind of delivers 95% of the job that we do and gives us that demand. But we have to think about technology probably now in a more holistic view in terms of how we can optimize things using technology. And I know Dave is probably going to allude to some of these when he does his conversation. So first part that I want to think about is auto summarization. So as contact center leaders now, we probably have more access to information in terms of speech analytics data and transcript of calls. And actually, one of the things that we see in the contact center is we have a great conversation with the customer, and we don't always necessarily follow that up with clear notes in the CRM, or we are trying to decipher Xander's shorthand, which is different to the acronyms that I might use. So we get some inconsistency in how that information is being presented. One of the things we can do now is create some more consistency through having auto summarization. And it gives us that consistency of notes, but it also gives us that completeness of notes. So you'll have probably gone onto a customer record where there's been no notes at all of any conversations, and we're left really picking up the pieces. Using auto summarization tools, we can create 100% of notes, and we can create them in a consistent manner. We just have to think about how we deliver that and how we integrate that into some of our solutions using some of the technology that's available. The next piece is knowledge management, and creating a really robust knowledge base is really important for agents to improve those contact center service levels, because half of the time sometimes that we spend with customers on hold is trying to find the right piece of information or undoing some information that we might have told that was wrong because actually somebody's just given us a nudge and said what you've just said isn't actually factually correct. So we need to make sure that we've got that knowledge base that's supporting agents, and we're looking at things like Agent Assist and tools that are going to help build that right level of guidance into the contact center. And that provides accuracy, and it provides more efficiency, and it reduces one of those acronyms that we talked about in the worm pit, which is rework, because it allows us to get things right first time. And then the final piece is how are we starting to embrace things like personalization, using CRM systems and CRM technology, and self-service, so that customers can use things like the IVR to answer the query. So if it's a balance inquiry, for example, if you're in the contact center, you're able to do that through the IVR rather than having to wait to speak to an agent. So it's what's your self-serve roadmap, and how are you using and leveraging things like your CRM to get that done in the best possible way. And that again provides demand reduction, and it improves the overall efficiency that we're running into with the contact center. So if there were a few things that I would say as final takeaways from this session, and I'm hoping I'm keeping to time here, Xander, I'm looking out for your glare. There are probably 4 key things that I'd say that we need to think about as a takeaway from this presentation. Hopefully you found some of them clever, and some of them might just be a good refresher. But these are the 4 things, and I love that transition, by the way, as we go out. These are the 4 things that I'd say is, where's your waste? Where's your waste in the contact center? What's driving the rework? And where are your customers queuing? Then we've got focusing on the conversation, and as leaders, coaching the conversation rather than focusing on AHT, so that we're giving agents the right tools to be able to do the job and have the great conversations that we know they're capable of. The last bit is, when's the last time did you do your AHT autopsy? What's happening at each stage of talk, wrap, and hold, and what's driving some of that internal wait time, and what's driving some of that customer experience? And then the final bit is, if you've got the option and you've got the capability, leverage that technology. So let the technology do the heavy lifting and help it create efficiency across all of the channels, not just voice. Think about all of the interactions you're having with customers and let the technology do the heavy lifting. I've been Gary Gormley. Thank you very much. Hopefully that was useful. If you'd like to connect with me and say hello, please feel free to scan that as a QR code, and that'll take you through to my LinkedIn page. And it'd be great to get to know people and hear about your experiences. So thank you very much. Over to you, Xander.
Gary, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing that presentation. Let me quickly share my screen again and we can start talking through it. Yeah, there's so much that to dig into, really. AHT also is AHT autopsy is a phrase I'll definitely be using in future because I think it's like you say, it's not quite as clinical as the name suggests, but it describes it so succinctly, and it's yeah, it's a really good practice I think to be taking. Also, the Peter Drucker quote as well is definitely something that I'll be using in future when we talk
You know what?
about
I talk about AHT autopsy, but I also do the same with IVR. So you've got an IVR autopsy. So it's just an expression that I suppose is quite graphic to kind of think about what you're doing with each of the different steps and processes within your business. So create
I
some
think
image.
it's again, it'll definitely stay with me at least. So hopefully it's the same with our audience. So without further ado, let's kick on with some of the questions. So we've got one coming in from Christina. My challenge is severe understaffing and no advancement in career path. The leadership on my team does not understand call center structure or metrics, and they do not have SL goals, which we would not meet. Any tips to change mindsets? Gary, do you want to kick off with this one?
Oh, you know what?
Spot.
That's a tough one. Because your vision, your mission, and your objectives should all be set from the top, and they should cascade nicely down. I think the biggest bit of feedback that I can give to that is use data and feedback to influence decisions. So if you've got customer information around SLAs not being met or long wait times, use that as the argument, if you like, and the data for the rationale for the changes that you want to put forward. And the senior leadership team should listen to that because ultimately it's impacting customer experience. And I think it's the voice of the customer that you can't argue with. So I'd use your customer data where you can to help form your arguments and drive the change that you want to drive. But it's a tricky situation if you've not got buy-in from those above you, it can be a bit challenging.
I'd echo that. I think putting it in real dollars is something that I was always told when in situations like that. Is making it clear this is what it's costing us to not do this right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dave, anything from your side?
Yeah, it's a big question, to be fair. I think the reality is, from my perspective, is the challenge you've got is you need to manage internal stakeholders. You need to manage upwards, which is harder, than thought leadership. So it's about understanding your stakeholders and understanding what's motivating them. So you've got to, play to their strengths, and it's an educational exercise over time. And the point that Gary made, I think you've got to put a dollar or a pound sign on that, and you've got to think about what their goals are and how by implementing a greater strategy within the call center that will meet their goals as well. And then ultimately you've got a whole other question in there about their staffing, which we'll touch on in the presentation. I think there's some few tips in there that you might take away.
Excellent. Christina, thank you so much for that question. Again, difficult to dig into all of it in the time we've got, but definitely I think some starting points there. Tip coming in from Tammy. We found customer satisfaction has improved by having dedicated agents to take live escalations with a max one day of callback if unable to resolve live. Interesting. Dave, do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, again, a great question. I think what this says to me is you are starting to think about having specialist agents, or what we're starting to talk about, smart agents, who are focusing on particular aspects of your business and therefore have a different skill set. So typically our agents have been multi-skilled. Now we're starting to see lots of deflection into digital channels and allow people to focus on what is really making a difference to their business. So that's what that talks to in my mind.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things we could discuss later on. I'm sure we touched on a few of them in your presentation again. So without stepping on your toes, Tammy, you might get some further advice on that tip coming up in the second half of this webinar. Question coming in from Lee: what are people's service level goals? A public utility in Idaho, ours is 80% in 60 seconds, wanting to benchmark. Thanks, Lee. Gary, again, this is a bit of a difficult question to pin down.
I've got an immediate view. I see a lot of organizations now moving away from level of service, grade of service, because it's quite a challenging metric to meet, I think, sometimes, and it doesn't necessarily mean a lot when you look at some of the the intraday level views that you see, and overall it can be you're achieving it, but you're having some really horrific periods at certain times. So typically, what I've worked to historically is 80% of calls in 20 seconds. I think it goes back to what your appetite is for your customers and what your customer needs are, because customers are willing to wait longer. I think a better metric to be looking at these days is average speed of answer, and saying, right, if it's below 90 seconds, I think you're in safe territory. The more it creeps up with that, the more challenging it gets. But I think sometimes if you set yourself up with a service level that's impossible, you're just always going to struggle to meet it. So I think it's understanding what your customer tolerance levels are, and then thinking probably more about average speed of answer rather than perhaps greater service, which is a bit more of an old school metric these days.
Excellent. No, thank you, Gary. Very succinct, very clear. I always like the 80-20. I think that's the Pareto rule originally. It's very useful in this case. For the sake of time, let me skip through the next couple of tips, and then we'll come on to Dave's presentation. So tip coming in from Erin: share customer satisfaction results or compare your customer experience to competitor customer experience. Focus on transferable skills development. We don't expect call center agents to stay with us forever, but we want their time with us to be well spent. Really good. And again, I think partially that goes back to Christina's question as well, which fits really nicely. So well done to the team behind the scenes for setting us up quite nicely there. Another one coming in from Tammy: we're working on implementing auto summarization in our call notes this year, specifically built into the system with drop-down options and selection that needs completion to capture relevant info and be consistent. And again, I think that comes back to what you were saying, Gary, as well, to be fair, about, like, say, the shorthand notes. It levels the playing field, so to speak. So there's less variance in how one agent would take notes compared to the other. And again, Tammy, I think that's a really good tip. Right, so for the sake of time, let me you can see the audience is lively today.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Dave. Rest assured, by the way, if you do type in your question or tip in the chat, we will aim to get back to you, even if it's not live on the webinar today. Someone from our side will do our best to get back to you here. But let's kick on with the next presentation. Dave Johnson, again, welcome. Thank you for your answers to some of those tips and questions. But again, before we kick off with your presentation, let's do a quick poll. So let me launch that. There we go. So do you plan to implement AI in your contact centers in the next 12 months? Yes, no, thinking about it, or already implemented? Dave, again, what do you expect to see with this?
Well, I think it's a real mixed bag, to be honest. There are people, it's obviously the topic of the moment. We are seeing it adding huge value to people's thinking and actually their implementation. So I think you're going to get a real relatively even distribution across here, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I think this is where you'll see 2024 start to differ from 2023 in a sense, because last year, again, we were still all talking about AI, but now we're really starting to see how that actually impacts us. The first movers have started to implement it, learning from those implementations. I think we'll start to see more this year. And again, the poll.
I said at the top of the call, I've been in the industry 20 years. I think now we're at a hockey stick moment with AI. It's going to permeate right across the call center, and it's going to change our thinking. And hopefully some of what I can talk about today will give you an insight into that.
Excellent. Well, again, without further ado, then, if you want to share your screen, we'll kick off with your presentation.
Right, you should be seeing those, or maybe coming through.
There you go.
Got it?
Gotcha.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Maybe morning for some people. I noticed there were some people from Canada there. So let's just talk about introductions here from my perspective, and let's talk about the evolution of the contact center. And I touched on as we introduced into this call. We think from our perspective that we're at a hockey stick moment. We've had great advancements in technology over many years, but AI and automation is now starting to permeate right across the call center. And we're seeing it is offering unprecedented opportunities. And from our perspective, and again, flavor of this presentation is it's driving two things. customer and agent satisfaction. And it's allowing us to think about those parts of the contact center in a way that we haven't before. And it's giving us some real opportunities there. And then what that ultimately drives is business performance and shareholder value. So the theme for today is these three components: the customer experience element, the agent experience element, and then how that impacts into your business. So what have we got? AI is starting to enable what we call a smart customer experience. Okay, it's getting more sophisticated. It's being personalized, and it's giving you the opportunity to really understand how you want to serve your customers in a different way. So we have the abilities to self-serve with intelligent virtual agents, and take a lot of the volume calls, volume issues into virtual or digital bots. And then we have the ability to start to assist the agent in a way that we haven't been able to do before. So what does this give us? Well, again, these are themes that we're starting to see from our customers who are thinking in this space quite considerably. First impressions count, right? They're important to us, and they give consistency of brand. They give the right touch. They give the right welcome, and they start to personalize the whole experience. We know personalization matters. We all appreciate that when we, interact with any organization, if they have remembered us, if they know us, if they remember what we did the last time we interacted, it starts to personalize. So your experience every time is what we're starting to see from the industry and from our customers. And that leads on to intelligent automation. The right automation, the right application of AI and digital at the right place, at the right time, within the experience. It talks about how we serve the agent better than we have in the past. And it talks about simplified self-service and the correct digital experience at the right moment. And then if we turn to the agent side, a lot of customers are talking now about a connected journey. It is not just a single transaction that you're interacting with. It's a whole personalized experience. The travel industry are really starting to think about this whole concept of the connected journey in terms of the experience that they give to you and their customers. And again, the human touch point, right? We want to be able to allow our agents to feel that they are valued, that they are empowered, and we want them to, ideally, we want them to be retained over the long term, so the knowledge that they have stays with the business rather than the churn rates that we've seen before. So that leads on to, we want empowered employees, right? We want smart employees who feel that they're adding real value, real service, and comfortable in their roles. So we assist them, right? We're going to give technology to assist them and give them the power that they really need. And that allows them to drive this customer expectation. So you've got this hand-in-glove experience going on where the technology can enable the customer in a way that we've not seen before through emotion and biometrics. And that then gives the agent themselves a much greater and powerful experience to serve that customer in a way that they haven't. And then the technology allows us to close off and wrap on the conversation with some powerful tools, which we'll talk about. So again, all enabled across AI. AI is going to permeate right across the call center industry. You may not know it's there, but it's definitely driving a different type of behavior. So what I would like to show you here, and just a little distraction into some of our product. And I apologize if it's going to be a little bit 5.9 product, but I think this is a really good case study, an example of how technology is empowering customers, and particularly in agents in this instance. So this is the Five9's agent desktop. Over here on the left-hand side, you have the usual call controls. Nothing unusual there, okay? But then you start to say, well, what have we got here? We've got a conversational transcript going on, okay? In real time, right? As the conversation between agent and customer is ongoing, you're experiencing the transcript. And what it allows the agent to do, it empowers them, because they can look back, they can reference, they've got context. This just adds another level of value. And then what have we got? We've got this whole task list here, which can be designed specifically for individual lines of business, individual agents, skill sets, you name it. But what it is, it's guiding the agent through the questions that they need to answer. And there's an intelligence behind that. So, depending on the outcome of one question, it drives the next. And again, just a much more informed experience. And it just takes the agent to a different place. We've got dynamic guidance. So Gary talked about this quite strongly in his presentation. So you've got, data coming through, let's call it that, material, which is from your knowledge base, from your FAQs, which is being driven by AI and served up at the right time to the agent in relation to the task list that's been applied. So again, just a much more informed, smart agent. We've got summarization. We know that at the end of a call wrap-up times can be quite significant if there's been a long conversation and there's a lot of material that needs to be written down and defined. This AI will automatically summarize it. It shortens your call time. It shortens your wrap-up. We are seeing 60, maybe 90 seconds improvement in some call lengths in here. And then finally, we've got what we call knowledge distiller. So slightly different to the guidance. The guidance is quite specific, but this is starting to take you into just another agent assist, right? It just guides them through the whole experience, and these are specific to lines of business or skill sets. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into how AI is starting to come into the call center. I think this for me, this is the real standout example, because it shows AI being applied in multiple locations, and it demonstrates that it's actually driving real customer experience and agent experience. We're starting now to talk about the smart agent, right, where a lot of calls are getting deflected elsewhere. So what does that do, right? So ultimately, if you are making those sort of changes to the customer experience and the agent experience, it then just starts driving business performance. So speed of answer increases, self-service containment starts to increase, self-service levels improve, customer effort reduces, satisfaction, and lifetime value, because customers find themselves wanting to be retained for longer and longer. Average handling time naturally reduces. You improve on your first contact resolution, because often we can deliver a lot of the data that's been collected while the customer was getting placed with the agent, and often delivered from a chat. So again, contact resolution, agent productivity increases. And then to some of the questions that we got earlier, the whole well-being of the agent and their satisfaction is a key component in the success of any call center. And obviously we'll see those experiences. So if we try and bring this all together, We want to empower, enable the customer. We want to give self-service, and we want to be empathetic and use emotion detection to try and drive that experience. We want an enriched agent. We want to remove many of the heavy transactions that are often unfulfilling work off to bots and digital agents. We free our agents up to focus on more complex interactions and we give them tools to make them more efficient and experts. We trigger improvements in experiences, that the experience becomes personalized. We reduce customer churn, and we start to increase customer equity and lifetime value. So you can see the flow here of driving customer and agent and then company value. So let's just take a look at a few proof points here. You know, don't just listen to us, listen to the experts here. You know, there's a clear correlation between customer experience and retention, right? You know, some of these are major researcher companies, and they're showing a 2 times increase in experience here. First call resolution. We all know there's a relationship here between first call resolution and CSAT, right? But this is calling it out, you know, in hard metrics. Customer effort is the strongest driver of customer loyalty or disloyalty, right? So customer effort is 40% more accurate at predicting customer loyalty. And then we start to talk here about a 7% increase in Net Promoter Score equals 1% increase in revenue. So a very powerful correlation. If we turn to some of the recent AI research work done, I think this is particularly interesting. You know, this is done by the Aberdeen Research Group, the preeminent group within our industry, and they're showing, you know, significant improvements in employee engagement, improving average handling time, first contact resolution, response times. So, you know, improvements in the contact center operation efficiency, decreasing in costs while growing revenue, annual company revenue, company lifetime value. All of these are key metrics which we're starting to see AI starting to have an influence. And then finally, I'd just like to conclude and wrap up by a research paper that was done by MIT and sponsored by the Boston Consulting Group. And basically their conclusion was, you know, transforming static metrics into smart metrics. And I think that's the big shift that we're seeing into smart metrics is driving much more greater efficiencies. Previously unattainable levels of data-driven organizational dynamics. You know, this is not hype. This is what AI is actually making possible today. And we've got customers who are coming to us and saying, let us understand how AI can drive that better customer experience and that better agent experience. And that's my close. So again, thank you for your time. Much appreciated. Hope that was useful.
Really interesting.
Amazing. Thank you, Dave. I'll tell you what, let me quickly take the screen back. Yeah, some really interesting points from there. And again, having seen these presentations a couple of times, I love how Gary sort of dovetails very nicely into yours as well. So hopefully some very good
absolutely and you know, and there's some obvious trends there, which is, you know, I think we're all starting to see.
Yeah, I think so. Right, I'll tell you what, let me quickly move on with the next bit of today's session so we can spend as much time as possible going through tips and questions from the audience. First off, a quick poll. Would you like to see a demonstration of the Five9 solution? Let me send that out now. Davis, at this point, I'd ask you to talk through a little bit about what they expect to see on that call, but one of your slides really succinctly demonstrated that, actually. And
well, yes, I mean, I think one of the slides there, which I took you on the agent desktop, you know, I've seen that on numerous occasions, and every time I see it, it's just so powerful. You know, we've been driving technology in the call center industry for 20 years with natural language and IVR systems, but for me, AI is bringing it all together onto the desktop in a way that I just haven't seen before. I have to be honest. I think it's a really exciting time in the industry.
No, I'd echo that as well. And I think our audience would too. So there we go. I'll end that poll there. And let's crack on with the top tips and questions that have come in from your presentation, Dave. So number one from Marie Cloud. Also summary of speech analytics is usually poor in any other language other than English. How does Five9 factor in localization when developing / testing language related features? Gary, forgive me.
Wow, that's a great question. Right. So we could be here all day on this. Right? I'll try and be succinct on this. We're a global provider, and therefore we have to provide multiple languages. That's the first thing. So the multi-language support is built into our products. And therefore, because we're a multinational, we've got to think about localization, globalization. We've got to think about local, local requirements and compliance. We test obviously across multiple languages, and what's interesting from an AI perspective is in each of our products, the AI engine that sits behind it, the customer can choose, right? So the whole range of, top, class providers of AI, we give customer choice, right? So you choose which engine you want to use. I'm not sure that entirely addresses that question, but it's a big question, right?
Yeah,
No,
I think there's some build on that as well. I think there's two aspects that I'm seeing with it. Is one, how does it support languages and multiple languages? The second is more around speech engines struggling with accents. And I don't even think that has to be international accents. I think it struggles with accent variation in the UK. And I think it's all around the volume of data that you feed it. And how you then train the model to become more efficient over time, and the bigger sample of data that you can supply either in a different language or in a different dialect, the better it's going to over time get used to those conversations. So a lot of it is very linked.
And these very large language models that AI is bringing are just taking that to a different level. And then what you can do with certain tools is you can then tune for your locale, as it were. So yeah, lots of options, lots of choices there.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. A very good answer to that question. Tip in from Erin: if you offer callers the option to join a virtual queue or to receive a call back, it can help improve your ABA. Again, I've seen this firsthand. It's very useful.
Yeah, so I mean, really what we are trying to offer and what our customers are asking for is a huge shift to digital. Okay. If you look at the vast majority of transactions that go through a call center, the vast majority of them, 80% or, in that region, can be handled by a chatbot or a digital agent or, some digitalization, which means that the calls that are then ultimately channeled into the agents, as we've indicated, can be delivered with intent. We can be delivered with details that are coming out of their CRM. The agent is fully informed of when the call arrives, and then you've got this whole concept of the smart agent, who is fully informed. They've got FAQs at their fingertips, and they have time to get things right and provide that extra level of service. So yeah, absolutely.
I think there's one other point to jump on with that, Xander, is when you're starting to implement queue buster or callbacks, for example, you've just got to be mindful of what some of your metrics are that are important, because when you start to introduce queue buster into your contact center, it doesn't necessarily take it out the queue. So if your metric is around grade of service, then introducing something like that is going to have a significant impact on your grade of service, because you're going to have that customer waiting. So that's why I think understanding and measuring what's important and thinking about that customer journey is another part of that, because whilst it takes the customer out of the queue to reduce your abandonment rate, it has an impact on your grade of service.
Great point. Great point.
Yeah. I think this comes to the business pulling in the same direction as well, right? It's everyone making sure, yes, we are implementing this, but it will have a knock-on effect on this, so maybe we need to change that metric. And it's just, like I say, we could talk about silos all day long if we wanted to. Here we go. Next tip: by implementing effective knowledge management, organizations can enhance customer satisfaction and loyalty. From Omid. Gary, do you want to kick us off here?
You know what? I can talk all day about knowledge management because I've seen it so many times where an agent is struggling for a bit of paper or struggling to look up something on an Excel sheet using some sort of VLOOKUP or something. So whether you're using a knowledge management system or whether you've got a really structured SharePoint file or some sort of folder-driven system, understanding what is in that, how it's governed, how it's maintained, is absolutely critical to helping the agent have a really good conversation and reducing and improving the overall efficiency of the handling time that you've got, because that's where you lose a lot trying to find it. Let me just put you on hold while I try and find the right version of what I'm sure should be talking to you about. So that knowledge management piece and integrating technology into that, as Dave was talking into his presentation around that virtual agent assist, is absolutely critical in helping deliver and improve the overall agent and customer experience.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I mean, from my experience, knowledge management has always been one of those elements of a contact center that can often be swept to the side a little bit. As in, yes, we'll get to it when we get to it for updating it, but especially now as we're moving forward with AI, we're having to feed that information into it. And if it's out of date in the first place, it's setting yourself up for failure.
And it's what ruins your chatbot experience, and it's why people then start saying, "Well, chatbots are no good," it's because you're not feeding it with the right information.
Exactly. Right, here we go. Let's move on to this next tip here. Amanda, you've written an essay. Let me do my best to get through this. We don't expect agents to stay with us forever, but we want them to enjoy our time, their time with us, be engaged whilst they are with us, and realize their engagement level hugely impacts the quality of service they are delivering. ESAT surveys are key, the NPS, to know where you are falling down in terms of engagement, focus groups to ensure their voice is heard in the business. We have found this exceptionally valuable and motivating for agents in terms of improving service, implement career/dev plans, even if not a huge step into other roles, but it may just be expanding breadth of knowledge and experience. Oh, there we go. Just about got through that. Dave, kick us off here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes, right? But it talks to another point as well in my mind, and it talks to brand, okay? And increasingly, people are really, and have been forever, but increasingly focused on brand. If every experience that we're having with an organization is a negative one, what's that doing to the brand of that organization? So good agents, happy agents, satisfied agents, people who feel that they can genuinely make a real positive difference to the customer, right? Ultimately drives brand loyalty. And for me, it's so obvious, it's frightening that most people don't think more about this.
Well, I think this comes back to, I think it was Christina's question that we had at the end of Gary's slide about how to get the upper levels of management involved within elements of contact.
Exactly. Place that question.
Exactly. And it comes back to, at least from my perspective, and if you look at other elements of the business, talking to your marketing team about how this impacts their brand is probably the easiest way to translate your knowledge into their knowledge. And it's trying to, because again, that's the beauty of a contact center. It impacts so many different elements of the business if you set it up to do so. Yeah. And it's just trying to figure out the right way to communicate that with the other elements of the business.
I'd agree.
So having a quick look at time, I think we're going to need to skip past some of these and move on to the winning tip. But rest assured, we will try and get back to as many of you as possible. So first off, though, what did you like best about the webinar? If you could pop it in the chat today, we've loved having you. I've been seeing out the corner of my eye just how much engagement we've had on today's webinar. So again, we're really thrilled here, but please do let us know in the chat, what did you like best about today? Whilst you're doing that, that gives us time to move on to the winning tip. So congratulations to Eric. The winning tip is map out the entire customer journey. When you do not do this, you ensure multiple transfers, which can drain customer satisfaction as well as employee satisfaction, as well as leaving the likelihood that there is waste work in the process. Really good tip. Gary, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, you know what? I'm customer journey mapping is 100% a major component of good customer experience. And I call it a leaky bucket. So where in your customer journey is the bucket leaking? And I think some of the stuff that has been said already around surveys and CSAT and measuring that across the different aspects that are important to you as a contact center will help kind of inform how much process improvement or how much of a problem there are at particular pinch points. Great tip.
Absolutely. And as we're reaching the top of the hour here, let me just quickly go through the rest of today's webinar. So as you exit today, you'll see a quick survey pop up from us. It's 3 questions long. Please do fill it out. Like I say, we love doing these webinars. We plan on doing many more this year, and we'd love to get your feedback on it so we can improve in future. So if you could do that, that would be excellent. Replay and slide, as always, will be available later today on callcenterhelper.com/article/recorded webinars. Our next webinar is coming up in May, which is what does an excellent customer service strategy look like? So feel free to register for that if that's of interest to you. And all that's left for me today is to thank our speakers for joining me and discussing this topic. Gary Gormley, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.
No, thank you. Again, a really great presentation from you. And again, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge.
Loved it. Thanks very much.
Dave Johnson, thank you so much as well.
Real pleasure. It's been really interesting. So thank you.
Excellent. And thank you guys so much for joining us. As always, we can't do this without you. So thank you so much for participating the way you have. And hopefully you've gained a lot of insights from today's webinar. But again, thank you guys, and I'll leave you all there. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.
Brilliant.